My name is Margaret. I am 74 years old, a woman who once worked my fingers raw as a seamstress in a small town where every dress I stitched carried a story of love, pain, and celebration. My late husband used to say I had golden hands, but those hands have turned rough and callous now. Yet still, they carry a strength I never knew I had. For the past 2 years and some months, I poured every ounce of that strength into a single creation, my daughter's wedding dress. I worked by candlelight when the electricity went out. I pricked my fingers until they bled, the needle slipping from my tired grip. I sold some of my belongings to buy better fabric, lace that shimmered like dew at dawn, beads that glimmered like stars. Every stitch was a prayer, every fold of fabric a hope that my daughter would walk into her future knowing she was loved beyond measure. And yet, on the morning I presented her with the dress, her words tore through me sharper than any needle ever had. "I'm not wearing that rag from your rotting shack," she spat, her perfectly manicured fingers brushing the gown as though it carried a disease. I froze. My throat tightened. That dress, the very heartbeat of my last 2 years, hung limply in my hands like it had been reduced to nothing but scrap cloth. I had imagined her eyes lighting up, maybe even tears of joy. Instead, she looked at me as though I were nothing more than a burden, and the dress nothing more than trash. Her fiancé stood behind her, silent, shifting uncomfortably. My daughter, once my little girl who clung to my skirts, who cried for me when thunder rolled, now called my home a rotting shack and my masterpiece a rag. I felt my knees weaken. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. But I couldn't cry, not yet. Not in front of her. Because in that moment, standing in the doorway of my own home, holding the very symbol of my devotion, I realized something I had been blind to for too long. And that realization was the beginning of everything. But let me take you back, because to understand how we reached this point, you must first know the story that began years before that cruel insult was ever spoken. When my husband passed away, life lost its rhythm. The house felt too quiet, the evenings too long. But my daughter, Claire, was my anchor. She was my only child, the one who gave me purpose. I wanted her to shine brighter than I ever had, to walk taller than I ever could. She had dreams of leaving our small town, of finding love, of being someone the world admired. And I promised myself I would give her everything I could, even when my hands shook and my back ached. She was only 19 when she told me she had met David, the man she claimed was her forever. My heart hesitated, because I had seen how quickly young love could fizzle. But the way she spoke of him, the way her cheeks flushed pink, I knew she believed it. And what could a mother do but support her child? So when they announced their engagement, I said the only words I could. "I will make your dress." Claire laughed at first, thinking I was joking. But I wasn't. 4 generations in our family, wedding dresses were bought. But I wanted to create something no store could ever sell, something woven with love, patience, and sacrifice. I wanted her to stand out, to look unique, to walk into her future with a piece of me draped around her. That was when the long nights began. I went through dozens of designs, sketching patterns in a notebook until my eyes blurred. The neighbors sometimes stopped by, shaking their heads at me, asking why I was working so hard when I was old and fragile. But I smiled and said, "It's for my daughter. She deserves nothing less." And yet, little did I know, as I bent over that fabric, Claire's heart was bending away from mine. I remember one evening when I tried to show her the progress. She barely looked up from her phone. "Yeah, that's nice," she muttered, scrolling endlessly. I thought she was distracted, that maybe she was just tired. But deep down, something inside me cracked that night. Still, I told myself she would change, that she would see the value of what I was doing when the final masterpiece was revealed. The days bled into weeks, and the weeks into months. My back stiffened, my eyesight dimmed, but my hands worked. Because in every stitch, I sewed a memory. The time I carried her to school in the rain, the nights I stayed awake while she coughed through fevers, the mornings I went hungry so she could have enough. That dress was not just fabric. It was sacrifice, it was love, it was me. But Claire wasn't the same little girl anymore. She was changing, and not in ways I could understand. She became colder, her words sharper. She started visiting less, and when she did, it was often with David. I welcomed him warmly, but something about the way he looked at me felt uncomfortable, like he pitied me, or worse, like I embarrassed him. Still, I ignored it. I told myself love would cover it all. But sometimes, love makes us blind to the signs we should never ignore. Because while I was building a dress, they were building something else. Something darker. Something that would leave me broken the day she called my masterpiece a rag. And here's the part you need to know. That insult, that rejection, was not the end. It was the beginning. The words that nearly crushed me also lit a fire I didn't know still lived inside me. Because she thought the dress was all I had. She thought the shack she mocked was all I owned. But she was wrong. Very wrong. And when she discovered just how wrong she was, her wedding day would never be the same again. I didn't sleep that night after Claire called the dress a rag. I sat alone in my sewing room, the lamp flickering, the gown draped across the mannequin like a ghost of everything I had poured my soul into. I ran my hands over the beads, tracing the patterns I had stitched with trembling fingers, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly invisible. My own daughter had looked at my work, my love, and spat on it. But what cut deeper wasn't just her insult, it was the truth behind it. She didn't just despise the dress. She despised me. Why had I not seen it earlier? The way she rolled her eyes when I spoke. The way she chose silence over phone calls. The way her words carried shame when she introduced me to others. I used to be her hero. Now, in her world, I was nothing but an old woman in a so-called rotting shack. But you must understand, a mother's heart doesn't give up easily. Even as her cruelty burned through me, I told myself there had to be a reason. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe David was pressuring her. Maybe I wasn't listening enough. That's the problem with unconditional love. It makes excuses for the inexcusable. The following morning, I decided to deliver the dress to her house anyway. I folded it gently, laid it in a protective cover, and carried it in my arms as though it were a newborn child. My knees ached as I climbed her porch steps. I knocked softly, but when the door opened, it wasn't my daughter who stood there. It was David. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. Disdain. Maybe annoyance. "Oh, it's you," he said flatly. I forced a smile. "Yes, it's me. I've brought the dress. I thought Claire might want to." Before I could finish, Claire's voice rang from inside. "Tell her I don't want it." The words sliced through me like a blade. David shifted awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. She really doesn't want it, Margaret. She ordered a designer dress from the city. Cost her a fortune. I blinked. Designer? My heart sank. All those nights, all those sacrifices, and she had already replaced me with fabric that didn't know her story. I nodded slowly, gripping the cover so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I see," I whispered. But as I turned to leave, David muttered under his breath, too softly for anyone else, but I heard it. "Good riddance to that rag, anyway." I stopped. My body stiffened. I wanted to turn, to scream, to throw the dress at his feet and demand respect. But my voice caught in my throat. I walked away, each step heavier than the last. That evening, I sat on the porch of my rotting shack, the dress beside me. My neighbors waved as they passed, but I couldn't wave back. I stared at the horizon, wondering how love could sour into humiliation so quickly. Had I raised her wrong? Had I loved her too much? Or maybe she had simply outgrown me. But then a memory surfaced, uninvited. It was Claire at 10 years old, standing in the schoolyard, crying because her classmates mocked her hand-me-down shoes. I had sewn those shoes back together 3 times, patching them with scraps, so she could keep wearing them. That night, I stayed awake, stitching her a new pair from fabric I had bargained for at the market. She wore them the next day with pride, and when the children laughed again, she shouted, "My mom made these. They're one of a kind." So when did that pride turn into shame? When did my stitches become rags? The thought gnawed at me for days. And while I wrestled with my pain, something else stirred, a whisper of anger I had buried for too long. 1 week later, Claire stopped by unannounced. She didn't sit. She didn't hug me. She just stood in the doorway, her purse slung over her shoulder, like she couldn't wait to leave. "Mom," she said, her voice clipped, "listen, I don't want you to bring up the dress anymore. I'm wearing what David's parents are paying for. It's designer, and it's what I want. Honestly, you should be grateful you're even invited to the wedding." My chest tightened. "Grateful?" I repeated softly. "Yes," she snapped. "Grateful. You know how people talk. You living out here in this place. David already thinks it's embarrassing. So just don't cause trouble, okay?" And then she left, slamming the door behind her. Grateful. Embarrassing. The words clanged in my head like cruel bells. I sank into my chair, shaking, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might stop altogether. She wanted me to be invisible at her wedding, to sit quietly, to smile, to pretend I was nothing more than a guest, not the mother who raised her. That night, I wept until my throat burned. But when the tears dried, something stronger remained. Because Claire had forgotten one thing. The rotting shack she mocked, the one David sneered at, wasn't the whole story. Behind the cracked paint and broken shutters lay secrets they knew nothing about. Documents. Deeds. Proof of things I had built long before Claire thought I was useless. I had never told her. I had kept it hidden, believing she needed to grow into her own life without leaning on mine. But if she thought I was powerless, if she thought I had nothing but rags, she was about to learn a truth that would shatter her illusions. The wedding wasn't just going to be her day. It was going to be the day everything turned. And as I folded the dress back into its cover that night, I whispered to myself, "You may not wear this, Claire, but you will never forget it." Because while she was planning her fairy tale with David, I was preparing something else entirely. Something they would never see coming. But here's the question you must ask yourself. Would a mother's revenge bring healing or destruction? And when the wedding bells rang, whose tears would fall first? The morning after I folded the dress and whispered my promise, I pulled out a dented tin box from beneath the floorboard of my bedroom, the one that had hidden more of my life than anyone ever guessed, and I asked myself if I was strong enough to open it again today. Inside were the papers I had kept quiet about for years. Deeds, contracts, letters from people who once believed in me when the world didn't. And I felt my hands tremble as I lifted them into the pale morning light, wondering who I would become once I used what they gave me. The first paper was the deed to a small strip of land behind my rotting shack, a narrow passage that connected the main road to the old stone church where weddings were held, and where the venue's parking spilled every weekend like a river of noise and perfume, which meant my shack held a little throat of land everyone needed to breathe through, didn't it? The second paper was a partnership agreement from years ago when my friend Charlotte fell ill and asked me to help keep her bridal shop afloat, a quiet 30% stake in what is now called Charlotte and Ivy, the very boutique that loved to boast about designer gowns and city style, the same boutique where my daughter had ordered her dream dress, which meant the business she chose over me had my name in ink behind the counter, didn't it? The third paper was a letter from Mr. Hawthorne, the original owner of Hawthorne Ridge Estate, the vineyard that had turned into the most sought-after wedding venue in 3 counties, thanking me for the quilts I made for his wife when she was dying and the small loan I'd given him when the bank threatened his fields, and in return he'd given me a limited partner's right and a covenant clause. If the venue jeopardized community ties or endangered public safety, I could call for a temporary suspension of events until a partner meeting was held, which meant the bells that rang there did not ring without some piece of my say, did they? I pressed the papers flat on my kitchen table and watched dust float in the sun, feeling foolish for hiding this power for so long, but also ashamed that it took my daughter's insult for me to remember who I was, because sometimes grief makes you small until a harsher pain shakes you awake, doesn't it? I boiled tea and stared at the dress in the corner, the beads catching light like tiny eyes, and I said out loud, "You will be seen," though I didn't yet know how that would happen without burning the whole day to ash, which was not what I wanted. Not yet. Then I put on my cardigan, slipped the partnership letter into my purse, and walked to see Nora, short, silver-haired, fierce-eyed Nora, my neighbor and once the best attorney in town before she retired to grow tomatoes and read thick books, because I needed someone who could tell me what I was allowed to do and what I should never do, don't you think? Nora listened quietly while I explained, her brow gathering into a thoughtful line as the kettle hissed behind her, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair and tapped the table twice like she was sealing something you couldn't yet see. "You're not powerless, Margaret," she said, and the way she said my name made me remember my spine. "But power is only good if you aim it right, so what outcome do you want?" I looked at my hands and answered honestly, "I want my daughter to remember that love made her, not labels, and I want her to walk down the aisle wearing dignity, even if she refuses to wear my dress. But I want to stop them from humiliating me and from turning this town into something mean and shallow, because I didn't raise her for that, did I?" Nora nodded slowly, then pointed to the partnership clause, tracing the paragraph with one finger until it ended on a sentence that had been written in my friend's careful handwriting. "In any circumstance where the venue's reputation endangers the common good, any limited partner may request a 72-hour operational pause pending review," which was a sentence that felt like a door I was afraid to open, wasn't it? "Use this only if they push you to a cliff," Nora said, her eyes steady, "because a pause will set fire to their plans and yours. And weddings are powder, Margaret, so if you strike a match, be ready to hold the light steady through smoke. Are you ready for that?" I wasn't sure I was ready to be that kind of steady, but something inside me had already stood up even if my knees still shook, and I nodded anyway, because sometimes your heart agrees before your head does, doesn't it? "Good," she said, then slid a notepad toward me. "We'll begin with letters, not fire. Polite, precise letters that remind people of the rules they forgot to honor, and we'll keep your name quiet unless they make it loud, because quiet power is the kind that rattles hardest when it finally speaks. Don't you agree?" We drafted 3 letters. One to the venue reminding them of crowd capacity permits and parking easements that crossed my strip of land. One to Charlotte and Ivy noting a conflict of interest in upselling my daughter while ignoring an existing family offering, requesting a courtesy meeting about ethical marketing and delivery windows. And one to the city inspector asking if the planned drone fireworks David bragged about at the bar had proper clearance over the vineyard and nearby homes, because gossip has a way of turning into smoke you can follow if you pay attention, doesn't it? I signed them with my full name. First time I had written it with real weight since my husband died, and Nora smiled as if she'd been waiting years to see my hand stop shaking, and I realized I had been keeping my voice folded like spare fabric in a dark drawer, hadn't I? As I walked home with the stamped envelopes, the wind lifted the hem of my skirt, and for the first time in months, I felt taller than my aches. And yet a question kept pacing at the edge of my thoughts. What would Claire do when she felt the tremor of what I'd set in motion, and would she turn toward me or away from me again? I set the letters in the outgoing mail and sat on the porch steps with the dress beside me, and that's when young Michael, the mailman with kind eyes and a baseball cap, slowed down to catch his breath and told me, without knowing he was telling me something that would bend the road, that he had just delivered a final notice bill to David's address that looked like a gambling debt from a city club, because envelopes talk if you know their weight, don't they? I thanked him, my heart tugging hard, because sometimes the thing that makes people cruel isn't pride, it's fear of being found out, and I realized there were snares around my daughter's life I had not seen, had I? That evening, I sat with a notebook and wrote down every thread that might be cinching Claire's heart tight. David's debt, his family's appetite for appearances, the way he flinched when he saw my hands, and the fact that shame sometimes wears a tuxedo and speaks softly while it empties your pockets. And I ask myself how you save someone who thinks your lifeline is a rope to tie them down. Days passed, and replies arrived like slow thunder. From the venue, a polite invitation to discuss logistics, given your historic involvement. From the inspector, a request for the event's full schedule and drone permits, and from Charlotte and Ivy, a curt email asking when I'd be available to talk about the delicate matter of my daughter's order, which told me the ground was listening even if the people weren't.
Isn't that something?
I chose the boutique first because the wound there was most personal, and also because I wanted to see the dress that had replaced mine, to look it in the eye the way you look at a person who took your chair. So I ironed my blouse, pinned my hair back, and walked into Charlotte and Ivy wearing the courage of many winters. The shop smelled like peonies and money, and mannequins stood in the window with backs too straight for real women, and the manager, a young woman with perfect eyeliner and a tone like a bell, approached with a smile that slid when I said my name, because she had been told to expect me and had not expected to like me. I could tell, couldn't you? "I'm here about an order placed by my daughter, Claire," I said, keeping my voice even like a seam that needs no second pass. "And I'm here as a partner as well, to discuss how you sell dignity along with lace, because if you can't, then you sell less than you think, don't you?" Her smile thinned, but she led me to the back office where the owner, new, polished, all business, sat with a folder on the desk, and they showed me the gown Claire had chosen on a screen, a dress dripping with borrowed shine, and I felt no envy, only a sadness that beauty had been taught to speak one language in her world, hadn't it? "I don't want you to cancel her order," I said, surprising even myself. "I want you to press pause for 1 week and invite her to a private fitting here. No sales pitch, no price tags, just a quiet room and her reflection, and I want you to hang her dress beside mine and tell her the real story of both before she chooses, because choice without truth isn't a choice at all, is it?" The owner exchanged a glance with the manager, hesitant because time was money and money doesn't like to learn new manners. But the partnership paper on the desk was patient and firm, and after a long breath she agreed, setting a date for the fitting and promising the room would be ours, which felt like a small door opening in a wall I thought was stone, didn't it? I left the shop and walked straight to the vineyard where Mr. Hawthorne's son greeted me with the same tired kindness his father used to carry, and we walked the rows of vines while I explained the parking easement and the swarm of guests they were expecting, and he admitted their event manager had overbooked and hoped the neighbors would understand, which was another way to say they were counting on people like me to stay quiet, wasn't it? "I don't want to stop the wedding," I told him. "I want you to keep it safe and decent, and I want you to remind David that my land isn't a shortcut his friends can use when they arrive drunk and late, because I will not have my porch shaking like a bus station, will I?" He agreed, promised to rope off the easement and hire 2 more attendants for the lot, and when I asked about the drone fireworks, he looked almost grateful for the inspector's letter because the truth was he hated the idea but didn't want to lose a client, which is how a small line in a contract can sometimes hold up a whole sky when everyone else is busy clapping, isn't it? On my way home, I passed Claire Street and saw her standing outside on the phone, her face scrunched tight, and for a moment I wanted to run to her and hold her like I once did when nightmares ate her sleep, but I kept walking because love that rushes in too fast can get its foot caught in a closing door, can it? That night, she came to me, unannounced, the way storms sometimes do, and stood in my kitchen with eyes that were tired in a way makeup can't hide, and before she could speak, I poured tea and waited, because silence can sometimes unwind a knot better than nagging fingers, don't you think? "David's worried about the wedding costs," she said finally, staring at the steam. "His parents promised more money, but it's complicated, and I just want the day to be perfect. Do you understand?" I nodded, listening to the way she couldn't look at me when she said complicated, which told me more than she knew she was telling, and I kept my voice soft when I asked if she wanted to come to a private fitting at the boutique. "No pressure, Claire, just a room and a mirror," I said, and she hesitated, then surprised us both by agreeing, because some doors open not when you push, but when you stand beside them with your hand held out, don't they? Before she left, she paused by the mannequin where my dress waited in the corner, her hand hovering over the sleeve like a bird that can't decide where to land, and I watched a flicker cross her face. Memory, maybe, or shame, and I didn't move because stillness invites truth, doesn't it? "Mom," she said quietly, "why do you keep everything you make so long, even when it hurts you to look at it?" "Because I learned to live with what I make before I let it go," I answered, hoping she heard the rest of the sentence. I couldn't speak, that I had learned to live with her, too, even when the shape of her love frightened me, and she nodded like she did here, which made my throat burn in the way relief does when it doesn't know where to sit yet. The next afternoon, I prepared the sewing room for what I knew was coming, either a reconciliation stitched with fragile threads or a tear that would not mend, and I set out my husband's thimble on the table because I always found courage in the thought of his steady laughter. And then I took the old rotary phone from the shelf and called a number I had not dialed in years. "Hello," said a voice I once heard through laughter and hospital halls. It was Ms. Riley, my husband's nurse long ago, who now ran the church's community fund and had a way of making people tell the truth without scaring them, and I asked if she could be at the boutique at the time of the fitting by accident. Just to say hello to Claire and tell one story about a dress I made for a mother who had nothing but wanted her daughter to feel like a sunrise, because some stories need a witness who remembers the weather, don't they? She agreed, and I hung up feeling both brave and afraid, which is the right way to feel when you're walking toward a door you actually want to open, isn't it? On the morning of the fitting, the sky was clear and mean, the kind of bright that makes people squint and hurry, and I pressed my dress carefully into a garment bag and carried it like truth, then met Claire at the shop where the room had been set quietly for us with 2 gowns on 2 stands, side by side like 2 versions of a vow. Whose voice would she choose? Claire walked in with her chin high and her lips tight, and the boutique staff slipped away as if the air had told them to give us room, and for a moment we just stood there breathing, and then she surprised me by touching my sleeve first, the seam where the lace met the silk, and I saw her throat move like a swallow she didn't want anyone to notice, didn't you? "Let me try this one first," she said, and I couldn't speak because her voice was softer than I had heard it in months, and I nodded, and we moved through the careful dance of dressing a daughter for a mirror. The hooks, the sighing fabric, the breath you hold while you lift the veil, and when she stepped onto the little platform and looked at herself, the room went so quiet I could hear the clock in the hall measure our hearts. Her eyes watered, which she blamed on dust though there was none, and Ms. Riley slipped in just then with a cheerful apology for being late and a story from another year about a young mother who sold her wedding ring to buy her daughter a dress, and then sewed a new ring from ribbon and courage, and my daughter laughed despite herself. And I saw the girl who used to defend my patched shoes stand up inside her for one long, bright second. Did you see her too? Then the door swung open without a knock, and David strode in with an expression that tried to pretend it had manners, and he looked at Claire in my dress and went still, and I thought for a breath he might soften like she was softening, but his jaw tightened instead, and he said, "You're not wearing that, Claire," like a man who's used to choosing other people's mirrors, wasn't he? She stiffened, the small sunrise snuffed by a cloud, and he went on about sponsors and a photographer who had aesthetic standards and his parents' friends who would expect certain quality, words that sounded like velvet over a cage, and Claire looked from him to me, trapped in a silence I knew too well. Haven't you known it too? I stepped forward, calm, because fury wastes fabric while precision sews, and I told him gently that she would make her own choice after she looked at both gowns, that we had a private appointment, and he could wait outside, and his smile turned sharp as a hook while he said he'd wait, if the owner insisted, which was his way of saying he only respected doors if he needed something behind them, wasn't it? He left with a flippant nod, and the room exhaled, and Claire whispered, "I'm so tired, Mom," which was a sentence that kept walking in my chest long after it left her mouth, and I asked her if she wanted water, if she wanted a chair, if she wanted to be 10 years old just for 5 minutes. But she straightened her back and said she'd try the designer gown next because she wanted to see what the world expected and what she expected of herself. Don't we all? We changed dresses, the silk sliding like a promise that forgot to ask your name, and when she faced the mirror again, she looked breathtaking in a way that magazines teach you to gasp at, and yet her eyes dimmed like a light turned one notch too low, and she kept adjusting the waist as if the dress was almost but not quite telling the truth, which is how lies feel when they're expensive, aren't they? She stood there, caught between 2 visions, and I said nothing because words would have been a theft, and Ms. Riley said nothing because wisdom knows when to be furniture, and the owner peeked through the cracked door with a hopeful smile that asked for mercy from the math, and the room held its breath to see which heartbeat would be picked, didn't it? Claire whispered, "I don't know," and tears, real, unhidden, slipped down her cheeks, and I stepped forward with a handkerchief my husband used to keep in his pocket for rain indoors, and I dabbed her face and said, "Then don't choose right now, let the day choose you, and when it does, I will stand where you can see me," which is all I have ever wanted to be for her, haven't I? We left the boutique with both gowns carefully packed, an agreement that no one would know until the morning of the wedding, and for a moment, I felt a new kind of peace as we walked to the street, until I saw David across the road speaking to a man I recognized from the inspector's office, slipping him an envelope with shoulders hunched, and the inspector's man turning away with a troubled face, which told me trouble was no longer rumor, was it? That night, I met Nora again, and we wrote one more letter, this one notifying the venue that a vendor was attempting to circumvent a safety review and that any drone fireworks used without proper clearance would result in a partner called pause. A pause I was prepared to execute at sunrise if need be, and my hand didn't shake when I signed. Did it? I went home, laid both dresses on my bed like two roads crossing, and I prayed aloud for the kind of strength that protects without punishing, the kind of strength my husband used to say was quiet thunder, and I listened to the old house creak around me like an elder clearing its throat, and I wondered if I was guiding the moment or if the moment had been guiding me all along. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, 3 photos in a row, Claire's designer dress receipt, a list of payments made from an account in her name that I knew she couldn't afford, and a single line that read, "Ask your future son-in-law about the club on Palmer Street tomorrow before noon," and my stomach dropped because secrets were knocking now with their faces uncovered, weren't they? I stared at the screen as the house went even quieter, and somewhere in the vineyard the wind changed direction, and in my chest something old and fierce rose up. The part of me that once sold a ring to feed my family, the part that had slept on a chair for a week in a hospital so my husband wouldn't die alone, the part that knows love is not weak even when it whispers, and I knew morning would ask me to become all of that at once, wouldn't it? At dawn, with both dresses packed and my papers in a leather folder, I walked to the edge of my tiny strip of land and watched cars breeze past, none of them knowing they were passing a seam that held several lives together, and I told the wind, she will not be humiliated on her wedding day, and neither will I, and the wind carried the vow down the road like a thread pulling tight. Then my phone rang, Claire's name lit the screen, and when I answered, her voice was not the voice of a bride or a child but something between, raw and shaking, and she said, "Mom, I need you at the church now. Please come alone, and don't tell David." And before I could ask why, the line went dead, leaving me with a silence that felt like a door swung open in a storm. What would I find on the other side? And as I stepped off my porch with the leather folder under my arm and both dresses in the back seat, a black car I did not recognize rolled to a stop at the curb. The window slid down, and the driver, David's mother, with eyes like polished stone, smiled too widely and said, "Good morning, Margaret. Shall we talk about what you're planning to do with those papers?" Which meant the game I thought I was playing quietly had just become public, hadn't it? If this chapter kept your heart beating and your mind racing, stay with me, because in Chapter 4, secrets break open at the church steps, and a choice is made that no one can undo. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe a mother's quiet thunder can still change the weather, and don't miss what Dawn reveals next. I froze on the porch when David's mother leaned out of the car window. Her lipstick was too perfect, too red, the kind of shade that said she never raised her voice because she didn't need to, her money did it for her. She glanced at the leather folder tucked under my arm, her eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting prey. "Why don't you get in?" she said, voice silky and sharp at once. "We'll drive to the church together. I'd love to discuss those papers before anyone else sees them." I tightened my grip on the folder. Her tone wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand disguised in politeness. For a moment, I considered stepping forward, sliding into that black car, and letting her unleash whatever game she was playing. But something inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, told me to stay where I was. "I'll drive myself," I said calmly. "I've already got something in the car that needs careful handling." Her smile thinned. She looked past me toward my old sedan, where the 2 dresses lay folded carefully across the back seat. Her eyes gleamed. "Ah," she said softly, "so it's true. You brought both." I felt the air between us tighten. She knew too much. "You don't understand," she continued, her voice low. "This wedding isn't just about Claire and David. It's about business, appearances, investments. Do you think my husband is paying for this event out of sentiment? No, Margaret. He's paying because every guest is a potential partner. Every photo will land in magazines. Your daughter is part of that stage. And if she wears that thing you made in your shack." She paused, letting the venom drip. "Then everything we've built collapses." I felt my blood boil. My shack, my hands, my dress, all reduced to nothing again. I wanted to shout, to slam the folder in her face. But instead, I took a slow breath. "Claire will decide what she wears," I said. "Not you. Not me. Not even David. Claire." Her expression cracked for just a second. Surprise, then irritation. "You're naive if you think she still belongs to you," she hissed. "She belongs to us now. And if you dare interfere, Margaret, if you even think about pulling your little strings, well, let's just say I know how fragile old women can be. Accidents happen." The threat hung in the air like smoke. She rolled the window back up, and the car pulled away, the engine purring like a predator slipping back into shadows. I stood rooted to the ground, my heart pounding. Her words weren't empty. I'd seen women like her before, powerful, ruthless, always hiding their cruelty behind pearls and perfume. She was the kind who smiled at funerals while counting inheritance checks. But I wasn't just any old woman. And I wasn't fragile. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and drove toward the church, my mind racing faster than the wheels. Claire's phone call replayed in my head. "Come alone. Don't tell David." Something was wrong. Something she couldn't say with him nearby. When I arrived, the church steps were deserted. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, and the old bell tower loomed above me. I spotted Claire sitting on the stone steps, clutching her knees, her veil hanging loose around her shoulders like a discarded net. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed with red. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do." I hurried to her side, kneeling despite the ache in my joints. "Tell me," I urged. "Whatever it is, tell me." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "David, he's not who I thought he was. He's drowning in debt, Mom. He borrowed money from people he can't pay back. He made me sign things, papers I didn't even understand. I thought it was just for the wedding, but now my name is on loans I can't repay. If I walk away, they'll come after me. If I stay, I'll be chained to him forever. I'm trapped." Her words cracked something deep inside me. My daughter wasn't just ungrateful or cruel. She was scared. She was cornered. "Claire," I whispered, "why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I was ashamed," she sobbed. "Because I thought you'd say, 'I told you so.' Because I thought you'd look at me the way you're looking at me now, like I'm weak." I caught her face in my hands. "You are not weak. Do you hear me? You made mistakes, yes, but you are not weak. And you are not alone." She clung to me then, like the little girl she once was, her tears soaking into my cardigan. For a moment, it was just us again, mother and daughter, bound not by shame or anger, but by something older, something stronger. But the moment didn't last. The heavy oak doors of the church creaked open, and David stepped out, his suit jacket crisp, his smile even crisper. But his eyes, they flicked from Claire to me, then to the folder in my lap, and I saw the mask slip for just a second. A flash of panic. Well, he drawled, walking down the steps, hands in his pockets. "Isn't this touching? Mother and daughter, having one of their little heart-to-hearts before the big day." Claire stiffened, wiping her eyes quickly. "David," she began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "No need for tears, darling. Everything's under control. The guests are arriving. The champagne is chilled. The press is waiting. All you need to do is walk down that aisle looking like perfection. And trust me, perfection isn't stitched together in a shack." His eyes locked on mine as he said it, deliberate, cruel. But this time I didn't flinch. I rose slowly to my feet, squaring my shoulders. "David," I said, my voice steady as stone, "you've been lying. About the money. About the debts. About everything. And you've dragged my daughter into your mess." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "What are you talking about, old woman? You don't know a thing." But I did. I opened the leather folder and pulled out the photos I'd received the night before. I held them up to him, letting the morning light catch every detail, the receipts, the payments, the club names scrawled across the documents. His face drained of color. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "David, is it true?" He sputtered, trying to form words, but the silence said more than any excuse could. That's when the church bells began to toll, loud and merciless. Guests started arriving, their chatter filling the courtyard, cameras flashing as they spotted the groom, the bride, and the mother no one expected to matter. And I knew in that moment, the truth couldn't stay buried any longer. But before I could speak, before Claire could decide, David's mother's car pulled up again. She stepped out gracefully, her pearls gleaming, her smile sharp. She looked at me, then at the crowd, and in a voice loud enough for every guest to hear, she said, "Margaret, I think it's time everyone knew who you really are and what you're trying to do to my son's wedding." The courtyard fell silent. All eyes turned to me, and I realized the battle wasn't going to be fought in whispers anymore. It was about to explode in front of everyone. The courtyard was silent except for the echo of those church bells. All eyes were on me, on the old woman in a faded cardigan holding a leather folder, standing between her daughter, her future son-in-law, and the woman who clearly thought she owned the entire show. David's mother's voice had sliced through the chatter like a blade. "Margaret," she repeated, her smile stretched tight, "why don't you explain to everyone here what those papers are? Or should I?" The guests murmured, curiosity rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. Men in press suits craned their necks. Women in glittering dresses leaned closer. The photographers sensed tension. They lifted their cameras higher, ready to catch whatever storm was brewing. I felt Claire's hand grip my sleeve. Her eyes were wide, terrified. For the first time in a long while, I saw her not as a bride or a stranger, but as my little girl again, clinging to me when thunder rattled the roof. I covered her hand with mine, steadying us both. "I'll speak," I said. My voice carried farther than I expected. Maybe it was the weight of years, or maybe it was the silence begging to be filled. David's mother folded her arms smugly. "Go ahead," she purred. I lifted the folder slowly, the pages inside rustling like wings. "These are documents," I began, "that show I am not just a woman in a shack sewing dresses. I am a partner in Charlotte and Ivy, the very boutique that sold my daughter her gown. I am also a limited partner in this venue, Hawthorne Ridge Estate. And I own the narrow piece of land every guest here crossed to reach this church." Gasps spread through the crowd. People glanced toward the parking lot, toward the vineyard, as though suddenly realizing the ground beneath their expensive shoes wasn't quite theirs. David laughed nervously, waving a dismissive hand. "She's bluffing. Just some old woman with old papers." But I pulled out the stamped letters from Nora's office and held them high. "These are signed, legal, and current. You may not respect me, David, but the law does. And so does this town." The photographers snapped furiously now. Guests whispered louder. David's mother's face paled beneath her layers of makeup. "Margaret, you don't know what you're playing with. This wedding represents millions in partnerships. You're threatening everything for what, an old dress? Your pride." My heart pounded. The easy thing would have been to back down, to slip away quietly. But I thought of the nights I stitched by candlelight, of the hunger I endured so my daughter could eat, of the way Claire once defended the shoes I patched with scraps. And I knew this wasn't just about pride. This is about truth, I said firmly. My daughter deserves to walk into her marriage with dignity, not debt. And all of you, I looked out at the guests, deserve to know the kind of man you're here to celebrate. I opened the folder wider and let the photographs fall to the stone steps, receipts, debt slips, evidence of gambling clubs on Palmer Street. They fluttered in the breeze, landing at the feet of stunned guests. A collective murmur turned into a wave of shock. Some picked up the papers, their eyes widening. Others glanced at David, their faces souring. Claire gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "David, is it true?" David's face flushed red, then pale. "Lies," he shouted. She forged them. She's jealous, bitter. Look at her. She's nothing. But the crowd had seen enough. And the cameras had caught everything. Claire's voice cracked through the noise. David, tell me the truth. Did you put my name on those loans? Silence. David's jaw clenched, his eyes darting. That silence was louder than any confession. Claire staggered back like she'd been struck. The dress bag she held slipped from her arm and landed on the ground. Her veil fluttered in the wind like a torn flag. Then, as if the moment wasn't raw enough, David's mother stepped forward, her mask of poise crumbling. Enough, she snapped. Claire, you are marrying my son today. Do you understand? You will walk down that aisle, you will wear the gown we bought, and you will smile for the cameras. That is what you will do. The crowd gasped again at her audacity. Some whispered, some shook their heads. But Claire, she just stood there trembling, caught between terror and freedom, her eyes darting between me, David, and his mother. Mom, she whispered to me, her voice breaking. What do I do? I took her hands in mine, steadying her. You do what your heart knows is right, I said softly. And whatever happens, I will stand beside you. The bells tolled again, louder, as if demanding her answer. Guests leaned in, holding their breath. Cameras clicked. The whole world seemed to press in on this single choice. Claire closed her eyes, tears streaking her cheeks. For a moment, it looked like she might collapse under the weight of it all. Then she opened her eyes, clearer now, fiercer. She looked straight at David and his mother. I will not be your puppet, she said, her voice shaking but strong. And I will not marry a liar. The crowd erupted, gasps, murmurs, even applause. David's face twisted in rage. His mother's lips pulled back in a snarl. And before I could move, David lunged forward, grabbing Claire's arm. You don't get to walk away, he shouted. You're mine. But that was his mistake. Because at that moment, several guests surged forward, pulling him back, others shouting for him to let her go. The photographs scattered further, picked up by the wind, carried like confetti of truth across the courtyard. And as chaos broke out, guests arguing, cameras flashing, David thrashing against the people restraining him, Claire turned and clung to me, sobbing. But even as I held her, I knew this wasn't over. Because David's mother wasn't done. She wasn't the kind of woman who lost in public. And the way her eyes locked on me told me she was about to strike back in a way I couldn't yet see. And whatever she planned, it was coming. The courtyard was still trembling from the chaos. Guests argued, reporters barked into their cameras, and the church steps looked less like a wedding venue and more like a battlefield. But in the middle of it all stood David's mother, perfectly still, her pearls glinting in the sunlight. Her stillness was more frightening than David's shouting. Rage, when loud, is easier to face. But quiet rage, the kind that smiles and plots, that is the kind that burns deepest. She waited until the noise thinned enough for her voice to cut through. Then she lifted her chin and said, with chilling calm, "This wedding is not over. And neither is my family's reputation. Margaret, you've humiliated us in front of every guest here. But you've also made a very grave mistake." People turned, their attention shifting from David's flailing to her words. She had regained control with a single sentence, and it terrified me. Claire clung to my arm. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking, "please, let's just leave. Let's get away from here." But David's mother wasn't done. She stepped down the church stairs slowly, every movement rehearsed, her eyes locked on me like a predator closing in. "Do you all know who this woman really is?" she called to the crowd. "Do you know what she's hiding? She talks about dignity and truth, but she's been keeping secrets of her own. Secrets she's used to manipulate this moment, to sabotage my son's wedding. She's not some poor old seamstress. She's been sitting on money, on land, on power, while letting everyone think she was pitiful. She's not noble, she's calculating." Murmurs broke out again. Faces turned toward me, some shocked, some suspicious. The same guests who had just sympathized with me now wavered, their loyalties shifting like reeds in the wind. My stomach twisted. She was turning the truth against me. Margaret, she pressed on, her voice rising, how long have you been plotting this? How long have you waited to make this spectacle, to destroy my son, to humiliate my family, and to flaunt your hidden wealth in front of the entire community? Is this really about protecting your daughter? Or is this about revenge? The word revenge hung heavy in the air, poisonous. Claire's grip on me tightened. Mom, say something, please. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But for a moment, my throat closed. Because there was truth in her accusation. I had hidden things. I had kept land deeds, investments, partnerships tucked away in tin boxes, while I let the world think I was poor. And though I had never intended it as revenge, wasn't there a part of me that had savored the thought of revealing them now? My silence stretched too long. And in silence, lies grow stronger. David's mother saw it. She smiled like a snake sensing weakness. You see, she said, turning to the crowd. She doesn't deny it. This entire scene, this humiliation, is her doing. She wants to control her daughter. She wants to control this wedding. And she'll destroy anyone who stands in her way. Gasps. Shaking heads. A guest muttered, I thought she was the victim, another said. Maybe she is bitter. Look at her. The tide was shifting, and I felt it pulling against me, threatening to drag me under. Then, just as my knees began to tremble, a voice cut through the noise. That's not true. Every head turned. It was Claire, my daughter, standing taller than I had seen her in years, her veil slipping down her back, her face streaked with tears, but her voice strong. My mother isn't perfect, she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. Yes, she hid things. Yes, she kept her power quiet. But she didn't do it to hurt anyone. She did it because she's humble. Because she doesn't parade her sacrifices like trophies. Everything she's ever done, everything, has been for me. Her words cracked the air. I felt my chest tighten, my eyes sting. She made me shoes when the kids at school laughed at me. She starved so I could eat. And she spent 2 years sewing me a dress, not because it was easy, not because it was cheap, but because she wanted me to feel unique, to feel loved. And I called it a rag. Her voice broke, but she steadied herself, lifting her chin. If there's anyone here who should be ashamed, it's not my mother. It's me. And it's David. A hush fell. David's mother's face went rigid. For the first time, she looked like her control was cracking. Claire, she said sharply, you don't know what you're saying? I know exactly what I'm saying. Claire cut her off. Her voice was steel now. I will not marry a liar. And I will not let you, or your son, or anyone else, destroy the one person who has never betrayed me. My mother. The crowd erupted, this time in applause. Not whispers, not gasps, applause. Some clapped hesitantly at first, then stronger, until the courtyard rang with it. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. My daughter standing beside me, her words sharp enough to shatter chains. But David wasn't clapping. His face twisted in fury. He shoved against the men still holding him back, his voice rising in a snarl. This isn't over, he shouted. You think you can humiliate me like this? You think you can ruin me? You'll regret this, Claire. And you, his eyes burned into mine, you'll regret ever crossing me. His mother grabbed his arm, trying to drag him back, hissing something under her breath. But his words had already fallen, like a curse over the crowd. The applause faltered. Fear trickled in. Because David looked like a man who meant every threat he spat. And as he was pulled away, shouting, the guests began to disperse, shaken. The wedding was in shambles, the fairy tale shattered. I stood there, my daughter's hand in mine, the 2 dresses still in the back of my car, the truth scattered across the church steps like confetti. For the first time in years, I felt seen, respected. But I also felt the shadow of something darker, something that hadn't ended. Because David wasn't finished. And neither was his mother. The applause from the guests faded, but the echo of David's threats clung to the air like smoke after a fire. I held Claire's hand tighter, even as my body trembled. For one fragile moment, we had stood tall together. But I knew prideful men don't walk away quietly. And David wasn't just prideful, he was desperate. As the last of the guests trickled away from the church steps, Claire whispered, "Mom, I'm scared." I squeezed her hand. "So am I admitted. But we'll face this together." The words felt strong, but inside, my heart was restless. Because I had seen the look in David's eyes. That wasn't humiliation that could be soothed. That was a promise of revenge. By evening, word of the ruined wedding spread through town like wildfire. Social media feeds flooded with photos of Claire in both gowns, of David shouting, of me standing with papers clutched in my hand. Some posts praised us for standing against lies. Others spun rumors, questioning why an old woman had hidden wealth and waited until her daughter's wedding to reveal it. And by nightfall, the retaliation began. First, a knock at my door. Too soft, too careful. I opened it to find an envelope slid under the mat. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed, "Stay out of this. Withdraw your claims, or you'll lose more than a dress." No signature. But I didn't need one. Claire gasped when she read it. "Mom, this is him. This is David." "Or his mother," I muttered, folding the note and slipping it back into the envelope. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. Either way, it means they're cornered. And cornered people lash out. I thought the threats would stop there, but I was wrong. 2 days later, when I went to the market for bread, I overheard 2 women whispering behind me. "That's her. The old woman who ruined her daughter's wedding." Their words stung like darts. Another man muttered as he passed, "If she had money all along, why did she let everyone think she was poor? Must be scheming for attention." Claire saw it too. When she went into town, people stared. Some avoided her. Others pitied her. The lies David's family spread were weaving into gossip, staining us both. But worse was what happened next. One night, as I sat stitching in the dim light, because sewing was the only way I knew to steady my mind, I heard a noise outside. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then came the crunch of footsteps. Then the sharp crack of glass shattering. Claire rushed in.
"Mom."
"What was that?" We ran to the front room. A rock lay on the floor, surrounded by shards of my front window. Tied around it was another note. "Stop, or the shack comes down with you inside." Claire's face went pale. She clutched my arm. "We have to go to the police." But I shook my head slowly, though fear churned inside me. The police can't stop whispers. They can't stop debts. They can't stop people like David's mother. If we go to them, it'll only make us look weaker. Claire looked at me in disbelief. "So, what do we do?" "Just wait for him to burn the house down." I picked up the rock, my hand steady now, my heart strangely calm. "No," I said. "We prepare." That night, I pulled out the tin box again and spread the papers across the table. My partnerships, my deeds, my hidden investments. I realized I had been holding them as shields, but maybe it was time to wield them as swords. "Mom," Claire whispered, watching me. "What are you doing?" I looked at her, my eyes steady. "I am done being quiet. They want war? Then we'll give them war, but on my terms." The next morning, I visited Nora again. She listened quietly as I explained everything, the threats, the rock, the notes. She frowned, tapping her pen against her notebook. "They're trying to scare you into silence," she said finally. "Which means you've already shaken them harder than you think." "What do I do now?" I asked. She leaned closer. "You file for an injunction. You freeze the venue's accounts until the debts are investigated. You push the boutique to review their contract with Claire. They can't ignore conflict of interest. And as for David," she smirked, a fire lighting in her eyes, "you drag his name through court if he dares touch you again." It sounded ruthless. It sounded terrifying. But also that sounded right. That evening, as the sun bled across the sky, I sat with Claire on the porch. She leaned against me, silent for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. For everything I said. For calling your dress a rag. For being ashamed of you. You didn't deserve any of it." My throat tightened. I wanted to cry, but I forced a smile. You were blind, Claire.
But now you see.
That's all that matters. She nodded, wiping her tears. Then she said something that made my heart ache and sore all at once. I don't know what dress I'll wear if I ever get married again. But I know whose hands I'll trust to make it. I pulled her close, my tears finally falling. But even in that tender moment, I knew David wasn't finished. He had too much pride.
Too many debts.
Too much to lose. And sure enough, just as the stars began to prick the night sky, headlights swept across my porch. A sleek black car stopped at the gate. David stepped out. Alone this time. His face was calm, not raging, not shouting. Calm in a way that chilled me to my bones. Margaret, he called, his voice smooth and low. We need to talk.
Now.
Claire gripped my arm. Don't go near him, Mom. Please. But I rose slowly, my heart pounding. Because something in his tone told me this wasn't just another threat. This was something worse. I stepped down the porch stairs, the gravel crunching under my shoes, and stopped a few feet from him. What do you want, David? I asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Simple. You back down. You drop your claims. You give me the papers. And, in return, I let you and your daughter keep your peace. I narrowed my eyes. And, if I don't? His smile widened, sharp as glass. Then you lose more than just your shack. Behind him, the car door opened. A shadow stepped out, his mother. Her pearls gleamed in the moonlight. She folded her arms and said softly, This is your last chance, Margaret. Choose carefully. The night held its breath. My daughter clung to me. The papers burned like fire in my mind. And I knew whatever I chose next would change everything. The night air was sharp, cold enough to sting my lungs, but the heat rolling off David's smug smile burned hotter than any fire. He stood there, his mother just behind him, both of them poised like predators circling prey. My daughter clutched the porch rail so hard her knuckles whitened. I could feel her fear pressing against my back, but my own heart was strangely steady. Maybe it was the years of silence. Maybe it was the countless nights of swallowing my pride. Or maybe it was the realization that tonight, under this moonlight, I had nothing left to lose except the chains they thought I wore. This is your last chance, David's mother repeated, her voice polished and poisonous. Hand over those papers, Margaret. Walk away quietly. Let us clean this up. I took one step forward, my old shoes crunching on the gravel. No. The word rang out louder than I expected. Claire gasped behind me, and David's smirk faltered for the briefest second. His mother narrowed her eyes. Do you really think you can win against us? We have lawyers. We have money. We have influence. What do you have? I lifted my chin. The truth. And the patience to wait for it to bloom. David's laugh was short, harsh. Truth doesn't pay bills. Truth doesn't stop headlines. You think people care about your little documents? They'll believe what they're told. And we'll make sure they're told you're insane. For a moment, his words cut deep. Because hadn't I already heard whispers in town? Hadn't I already felt the sting of being painted bitter and scheming? My silence the other day had nearly cost me everything. But then I remembered Claire's voice in the courtyard, ringing strong. My mother has never betrayed me. I wasn't insane. I wasn't bitter. I was a mother who had loved too quietly for too long. You can smear my name all you want, I said firmly. But you won't break me. And you won't break her. I glanced back at Claire. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she stood straighter now, her fear beginning to turn into fire. David sneered. Big words from a woman in a shack. I smiled then, though my lips trembled. Funny thing about shacks. Sometimes they're built on land no one else realized mattered. And sometimes the people inside them hold the keys to bigger houses than yours. His smirk faded. His mother's eyes flickered, realizing I wasn't bluffing. She knew. She understood now that the papers I carried weren't scraps. They were levers. I've already filed for injunction, I said, pulling a folded document from my cardigan pocket. The stamped seal gleamed in the moonlight. The venue's accounts will freeze until the investigation is complete. Charlotte and Ivy will be audited for their contracts. And your debts, David. I let the pause cut sharp. Well, let's just say the wrong people already have your name on paper. And they'll be knocking soon. His face drained of color. You. His mother gripped his arm, her composure cracking. She's bluffing, she snapped. But her voice wavered. I stepped closer. So close I could smell the expensive perfume clinging to her. Try me, I whispered. Push me one more step, and I will pull every thread until your family's empire unravels like a cheap seam. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. For once, they had no words. Finally, David's mother hissed. This isn't over. No, I said softly, it isn't. But for you, it's only beginning. They turned sharply, retreating to their car. The engine roared to life, gravel spraying as they sped away into the dark. For a moment, the night was still again. My knees trembled, my breath ragged. Then I felt Claire's arms around me, clinging tight. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. How did you stand there like that? I held her close, my tears finally falling. Because I had to.
For you. For me.
For everything they tried to take. We stood on the porch until the stars blurred through my wet eyes. But even as I held my daughter, even as I felt her begin to trust me again, I knew the storm wasn't gone. It had only changed shape. Because powerful people never accept defeat quietly. They retreat, they reload, and then they strike harder. And I could feel it. David and his mother were already planning their next move. But so was I. The night after David and his mother sped away, the shack felt colder than it ever had. Not because the wind whistled through the broken window or because the old walls creaked like tired bones, but because I knew their retreat was not surrender. It was strategy. I lay awake, listening to every sound outside, the rustle of leaves, the distant growl of a car engine, even the hoot of an owl. Every noise felt like a warning. Claire slept fitfully in the next room, her breathing jagged with leftover fear. I sat by the sewing table, staring at the half-lit dress on the mannequin, and whispered to myself, "Hold steady, Margaret. Hold steady." By morning, their strike had begun. The town paper carried a front-page story with a headline that cut sharp. Local seamstress sabotages daughter's wedding, claims of hidden wealth questioned. The article painted me as a bitter, lonely woman who had staged the scene at the church for attention. It claimed the documents I held were questionable, that I had fabricated debts to frame David, that I had embarrassed my daughter out of jealousy. My rotting shack was described in detail as though poverty and pride were sins. Claire slammed the paper down on the table. "This is all lies," she shouted, her voice breaking. How could anyone believe this? I touched her hand gently. Because people love a story. And sometimes they love the wrong one. But it wasn't just the paper. By noon, phone calls started flooding in. Neighbors, once kind, now hesitant, asking if I really forged documents. Old friends leaving messages too polite, too distant. And then, silence, the kind that isolates you faster than shouting ever could. David's mother's influence was everywhere. She wasn't just fighting me in whispers anymore. She was trying to erase me. But she had miscalculated. Because I had allies she hadn't accounted for. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. It was Nora, my neighbor and retired attorney, carrying a stack of files under her arm. Behind her stood Michael, the young mailman, and two women from the town council I had once stitched gowns for. "We're not letting them bury you, Margaret," Nora said firmly. "I've pulled court filings, venue contracts, and copies of David's loan papers. It's all real. We're building a case." Michael nodded, his cap clutched in his hands. "And I can testify about the debt envelopes I delivered. Everyone at the post office knows he's been drowning." The councilwomen added their own voices. "And we've seen how the Hawthorne venue has bent rules for David's family. They've overstepped before. It's time someone stopped them." I felt my throat tighten, my eyes sting. For days, I'd felt the weight of being outnumbered. But now, standing in my tiny kitchen, were people who believed me, who were willing to stand with me. Thank you, I whispered, my voice breaking. Nora gave a small smile. Don't thank us yet. This is going to get ugly. And she was right. The next day, a formal notice arrived. David's family was suing me for defamation, claiming I had ruined their reputation with false accusations. The number they demanded was laughable, meant to crush me. Claire gasped as she read it. Mom, they're trying to bankrupt you. I steadied myself. They think fear will silence me. But they've forgotten. Silence is what made me dangerous in the first place. That night, as we prepared the counterfilings, Claire sat across from me, her face pale. Mom, what if we lose? What if they destroy us? I reached across the table, taking her hands in mine. Then we lose together. But I'd rather lose fighting for the truth than win bowing to lies. She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. And for the first time, I saw not just my daughter, but a woman growing into her own strength. The following week was a blur of depositions, interviews, meetings. The town buzzed with divided opinions. Half thought I was a bitter mother clinging to power. The other half thought I was a warrior standing up to corruption. Then came the breaking point. A reporter from the city paper, bigger than our small town's gossip rag, came knocking. She had been following whispers about David's debts and his family's influence. She asked for an interview. Margaret, she said gently, do you want your side of the story heard? I looked at Claire. She nodded. And so, with trembling hands but a steady heart, I told everything. The years of sacrifice. The 2 years stitching the dress. The insult that shattered me. The debts. The threats. The rock through the window. The way David's mother tried to paint me insane. The article hit the city paper like a storm. The headline, Mother's Love versus Family Empire. The dress that sparked a war. It spread far, far beyond our town. Suddenly, it wasn't just gossip. It was news. But with the attention came risk. That evening, as Claire and I sat reading the story together, headlights swept across the porch again. A car slowed at the gate. But this time, it wasn't David's sleek black sedan. It was an unmarked car. And when the door opened, 2 men stepped out, neither of them familiar, both of them dressed too neatly, moving too carefully. Margaret. One of them called. His voice was clipped, official. We'd like a word. Claire clutched my arm. Mom, who are they? The men walked closer, their faces unreadable. And in that moment, I realized David's family wasn't just fighting me in court or the press anymore. They were pulling strings I hadn't even seen yet. Strings that reached beyond money and gossip. Strings that could crush us if I wasn't careful. The 2 men stood at the edge of my porch, their shoes too polished for country dust, their suits pressed crisp under the moonlight. They didn't belong here. Everything about them screamed city, power, authority. Claire's grip on my arm tightened, her nails digging into my skin. Who are you? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. One of them reached into his jacket, and my breath caught, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a badge. Federal. My stomach flipped. Mrs. Margaret Lane? He asked. Yes, I said cautiously. We're investigating financial irregularities connected to David Holloway and his family's businesses. We have reason to believe you may have information. For a moment, the world tilted. David, his family, their debts, their threats. And now, the law was circling them. I steadied myself. What kind of information? The second man stepped forward. Loan documents, debt slips, any evidence of coercion. We've had multiple anonymous tips pointing to fraud, laundering, and illegal partnerships tied to the Holloway estate. Claire gasped softly beside me. Mom, she whispered, the photos you got, the receipts. They weren't just from an enemy. Someone wanted this exposed. The agent's eyes flicked to her, then back to me. Do you have the documents, Mrs. Lane? Slowly, I stepped inside, lifted the tin box from under the floorboard, and returned with it pressed against my chest. The papers I once thought were shields, then swords, now they were proof. I set the box on the porch table. It's all here, I said. Every piece. They flipped through the pages carefully. Their eyes sharpened as they read. Finally, one of them nodded. This is exactly what we need.
Thank you, Mrs. Lane.
You may have just saved yourself and your daughter from far more than a ruined wedding. Relief flooded me, but it was tangled with fear. Because if the law was circling, David would lash out harder. And he didn't disappoint. The very next day, as Claire and I walked into town, David's car screeched around the corner and skidded to a stop inches from us. He jumped out, wild-eyed, hair disheveled, his tie hanging loose. "You think you can destroy me?" he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "You think you can take everything from me?" People on the street froze, staring. Phones lifted, recording. But David didn't care. He lunged toward me, his fists clenched. Claire screamed, "Stop it, David." But before he could reach me, a voice boomed across the street. "Enough." It was Nora, standing tall in her old lawyer's stance, her cane pointed like a weapon. And, behind her, the two federal agents. They rushed forward, seizing David by the arms. He thrashed, shouted, cursed, but they were stronger. His mother appeared from across the street, her face pale, her pearls trembling against her chest. "This isn't justice," she screamed. "This is sabotage. You'll regret this, Margaret." But no one was listening to her anymore. The agents shoved David into the back of their car.
The doors slammed.
Sirens wailed as backup arrived. And just like that, the man who had humiliated me, threatened me, tried to crush me, was gone, swallowed by the very truth he mocked. The courtyard crowd from the ruined wedding wasn't here. The reporters weren't here. But Claire was. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "You saved me, Mom. You saved us." I pulled her into my arms, my own tears soaking her hair. "No, Claire," I said softly. "You saved yourself. You chose truth over lies. I only stood beside you." For the first time in years, we stood together not as mother and child divided by pride, but as women bound by survival, love, and something stronger than either of us had realized. The weeks that followed were a blur. Investigations swept through David's family empire. Fraud charges. Business partners cutting ties. His mother's name, once untouchable, dragged through headlines. And me, once mocked as a woman in a shack, was called a whistleblower, a mother of steel, even a hero by some. But I didn't care for the headlines. I only cared for the quiet moments, Claire sitting beside me again at the sewing table, her fingers helping guide fabric through the machine. The silence between us no longer heavy with shame, but soft with understanding. One evening, as the sun set and the cicadas hummed, Claire reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom," she said softly, "when I do get married someday, maybe not soon, but when I do, will you make my dress again?" I smiled, my throat tight with tears. It would be my honor. We both laughed, fragile and free. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the shack wasn't rotting, it was alive. It had sheltered pain, but it had also birthed strength. The dress still stood on the mannequin, shimmering in the fading light. Not a rag, not a shame, but a symbol of love, of sacrifice, of truth. And this time, I knew it would never be forgotten again. That was the end of the war, but not the end of the lesson. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: never mistake a mother's silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is just patience, waiting for the right moment to roar. And when it does, no empire of lies can stand against it. Speech balloon, if this finale gripped you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because every story of truth deserves to be heard. And maybe this one reminded you, no love is stronger, no thread tougher than the quiet strength of a mother's hands.